you're not just issuing these like kind of downstream of your product invoices once a month, but rather making monetization a core part of your product experience and your go-to-market motion. That requires kind of really up-to-date data.
Yeah.
And it requires Metronome, and thus requires, Confluent.
That's Cosmo Wolfe, Chief Technology Officer at Metronome. And this is Life is But a Stream, the web show for tech leaders who need real-time insights. In this episode, Cosmo and I are going to take a deep dive into how Metronome is tackling one of the biggest challenges in software building. As Cosmo explained, you can't solve building without data in motion. I'm your host, Joseph Morais. Let's get started. So let's get right into it. What do you and your team do at Metronome?
Yeah, so Metronome is a company that got founded about 5 years ago, and we build what we call monetization infrastructure, which is a relatively new segment of technology. And really what monetization infrastructure means for us is we kind of own the entire stack that enables companies to go to market with the products that they build. And so, you have companies like Confluent, like the other kind of hyperscalers that are, maybe your kind of classical compute infra or data infra, and Metronome is monetization infra. So we do billing, metering, rating of any sort of spend, margin calculations, revenue forecasting, sales comp, all of that kind of stuff that requires visibility and insight into kind of the monetization data. Metronome provides that for tons of companies across the space.
Right, so it's not just billing, right? And you would think when you look at it on the nose, it's a billing platform, but it's all of these other pieces that kind of sit upstream and downstream from billing as well.
Exactly, and that's a really key insight, because I think we'll get talking about why Metronome uses Confluent, and then a big part of that is that billing is kind of a classically batch process, right? You get every month. You get some invoices.
Yes.
Like there's why you don't need data streaming for billing, or maybe you do, but I can't think of maybe a story to tell there. But for
bill by the second.
Yeah, for even then you're still issuing the invoices once a month.
That's
but
true.
When you're doing these kind of, when you're bringing your spend back into the product, so you're giving real-time visibility, or maybe cutting people off when they burn out of credit,
Sure.
or any sort of like real-time fraud detection, anything where you're not just issuing these like kind of downstream of your product invoices once a month, but rather making monetization a core part of your product experience and your go-to-market motion. That requires kind of really up-to-date data.
Yeah.
And it requires Metronome, and thus requires, Confluent.
Right, interesting enough. Very interesting, because, again, billing is inherently, on some type of time horizon, right? It's inherently batch, but monetization is inherently real time. Yeah. So it's interesting to kind of be able to take both of those challenges. So normally I would ask, who are your customers, but we already let it out the bag, but Confluent is a customer of Metronome. So we have this really interesting relationship, right? Where you're using our services and we're using your services. So you're billing yourself in a way. And that's just kind of like, it's a Ouroboros to me.
Yeah, it's really fun, actually. I think Confluent, the Metronome I mentioned, got started about 5 years ago. Confluent was one of the first companies that we talked to, because if you rewind 5 years before all the AI, and the market looks fundamentally different now, who was doing usage-based billing? Usage-based billing was not that common of a thing. You had the AWSs, you had the Confluents, you had basically infra SaaS hyperscalers, and then maybe some fintech. And so we talked to all the infra SaaS companies, and our founders were very close with the Confluent folks. And Confluent at the time was just embarking on building out pretty involved, I would say, internal system, which makes sense because Metronome didn't exist at the time.
Sure.
And then, several years down the road, Confluent ended up switching to Metronome and putting 100% of the monetization, the revenue of Confluent through Metronome, using Metronome to do that, to free up, your resources, your engineers, or basically team in general, to focus on your core competencies, as opposed to fighting billing and random metering systems. And then meanwhile, Metronome, when we got started, like say about 5 years ago, it was like very clear that we were going to be a streaming data platform. That's what the market needed. And so Confluent was Kafka was a natural choice, and then Confluent was a natural choice. And so we have this like very fruitful, I think, 360-degree relationship where we're both doing the things that each other don't, it's not our core competency to run broker fleets, and it's not your core competency to do metering and rating, and both of our companies are more efficient because of it.
It is an exciting time. I mean, I remember, pre even cloud, right? You had some relationship between hardware vendors, software vendors, but not like now where you kind of have these dependencies between SaaS platforms. I mean, how many companies are on Slack, right? And it's just this, I don't know, it's kind of an amazing time that you can sign up for something and have this really complicated infrastructure, whether it's monetization or data streaming or communications, and you can start running and doing it right now. We set the stage. Let's dive deeper into the heart of your data streaming journey in our first segment. So you kind of already talked about some of this, at least kind of where you're at now, but I'm curious, 5 years ago, everything's brand new. What were the challenges that your company faced in terms of like needing real-time data?
The challenge, the kind of the classic, early startup challenge is that we didn't have a product and we had no engineers, and and we had, early, it's always kind of like a chicken and an egg where you're, getting your first customer and then they need some things you don't have and you're trying to do your first hire to build those things. And so, I mean, really, we had a vision for what monetization infrastructure was, which was effectively a real-time lens or view on top of the events that were happening in your company,
Mm-hmm.
and with monetary values attached. So maybe it's an API call occurred, or a broker spun up, or a server hour completed. Maybe it was a payment or something that happened, and we need to process those events, in a durable, exactly once manner, and then do kind of all sorts of things that we couldn't even conceive at the time downstream of that, at the time. And again, we have, very few people. We certainly didn't have like a team of people experienced in running high scale data streaming systems. And so, but we knew, like the naive approach is we could have, I don't know, built everything in a monolith. And I actually don't even know what we would have done. I think it was kind of always in our minds that we would be using some sort of platform like a Kafka.
Gotcha. You
And
came into the design with that in mind.
yeah,
That's
because
good.
it's just like there's, if you're already doing, I don't know what the numbers were at the time, X events a second, and it's like, okay, like sure, you can handle this in one AWS host or something, but like we want to build a system that scales
Yeah,
because again, we don't have any engineers. We don't want to just have to be fighting fires all the time.
sure.
And so, we Kafka was a very obvious choice. It's the common language of data streaming, and in a lot of cases, I think, and especially for when we want to start, we know that in the future we might want to plug in this or that or this other thing that we don't even know yet. It's like, let's use a common platform like a Kafka. And then if you kind of commit then to running a large distributed system like a Kafka that early, for us at least, it was a very obvious choice to do managed and not run in house. Because again,
Sure.
like literally, I was there. We had 3 engineers, and none of us were, had run Kafka fleets before in any sort of meaningful way. And it's the same thing. We're not spinning up racks and data centers. We're using AWS. And so it's
Yeah.
like Confluent was a very obvious choice because we literally, like what you were saying, go to the website, click a button, get a broker fleet basically. And that was the value prop at the time. And it's remained relatively consistent throughout our whole relationship because, we now are doing, I don't even know the numbers. I'd be probably better podcasting if I did. But like,
I heard tens of thousands of invoices are processed per second.
yeah, tens of thousands of
It's
invoices,
very impressive.
billions of events a day, all kind of exactly once processed. Hundreds of thousands of events a second in cases, and we still have a relatively small infra team, and certainly not like we don't have like a Kafka team or a broker team or anything like that. We have democratized the ability to build these pretty high scale streaming applications on top of the platform.
I love that. I guess the data streams just work, so don't have to worry about growing the team. That's a very important thing when you're thinking about scaling out. Because even when you started, like had you had one of the founding engineers that did have data streaming experience, that's not necessarily sufficient experience at scale, right? It's like, okay, yeah, I can run 3 broker clusters, no problem. I did it myself. But once you're talking about increasing that by an order of magnitude, and then increasing that by an order of magnitude, that's when things get very hairy. And it's just honestly, if you don't have to worry about it, let somebody else do it. I'm curious though, is it fair to say that most components of Metronome are inherently event driven?
It's a good question. I kind of mentioned earlier how billing is inherently batch, and that's actually true. I mean, I keep hammering this monetization infrastructure because it spans so far beyond billing, but it is a superset. We do have to do billing too. So we have relatively large batch workloads for things like an end of month bill
That
run.
makes
And
perfect sense.
that's an interesting challenge at Metronome from an engineering perspective, is you can kind of have the trade-off between batch and real time. And a lot of times people kind of have to go all in on one or the other and become really good at operating at the extremes of scale. Like you know, all the challenges we go through with Kafka, I'm sure you could also go through with like a Spark technology or something at scale. We, in some ways, have to become experts at both ends because
Sure.
we're doing these like huge batch workload. But I think primarily we think of everything in events. Anything that's not event driven is like because this is a scheduled workflow, not because that's the default. And
Right.
so all usage that our customers are sending us are in events. Any sort of changes you're making to kind of configuration, we store, in events as well. So instead of storing the kind of like current state, we store event sourced events like this change happened, that change happened, which makes it very easy to kind of rewind any point in time and say what should have the invoice or what should have the configuration been at this point in time, and then we merge those event streams together for the eventual kind of pricing and packaging, the invoice computation. And so I think it is fair to say that we think very kind of event driven,
Yeah.
even if not all of our workloads or systems are streaming based.
Yeah.
All the kind of like core ones.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, thinking about, a traditional financial services company, right? They have vendors, merchants, individuals, right? These are their customers. They're all creating some type of transactions, probably at a relatively low rate compared to, say, something like a bunch of EC2 instances, right? And thinking about each of these instances, when they turn on, when they turn off, turning on a feature, turning off a feature, upgrading a feature. All of these are events that you have to think about.
Yeah. Well, you've not even started talking about AI yet. Every time,
Well, we'll get there.
every time an inference happens,
Oh, wow.
there's a lot of inferences going on. Let me tell you. And so yeah, there's the volume of events that we have to deal with is really just anytime any of our customers, anything that could be revenue impacting happens in one of their systems. So, a user is using their product, users logging in, an API call is being made. We have to deal with all of that. And it's an extreme amount of data, and being able to deal with it kind of as it occurs, as opposed to kind of batching it up and doing these huge batch workloads and worsening the product experience. Because if we were only able to deliver you your revenue data, let's say daily, or maybe like cut users off hourly, that would really undermine our ability to deliver the value that our clients
Yeah.
expect. And so, real time is so core for that, and at extreme volume, like I was saying.
Yeah, what's that extra 3 hours per customer over time? It's quite a bit of a magnitude. So, kind of take me back again. Let's go. Let's continue talking about those early days. What? How did you think about addressing real time billing? What was the idea that sparked the start of Metronome? Was it, hey, nobody out there is doing this, and we see an opportunity? Was it, this desire for having, this real time ability to actually bill and cut things off? Like, what was the spark?
The like short answer is our founder Scott ran growth at Dropbox, and
Okay.
Dropbox is actually famously not a usage-based billing company, right? They have huge
Yeah.
usage-based costs. They're all their storage, but it's
Mhm.
not a usage-based company. But the growth team there was responsible for basically figuring out how can we, increase user retention, but then also revenue the fastest. And a lot of times that's based on how you bring the product to market. Can we offer free files to people who do this? Can we say like,
Mhm.
maybe we are going to bill by usage once you go over X amount of storage? And without fail, the kind of like what's the word? The thing that prevented those experiments was the billing system.
Right.
And so in that case, it was a billing system. It was like, we literally cannot invoice our customers for these experiments you want to run. We can do it in 9 months. And then 9 months later, it's like, well, we're moving very slowly. And so
Sure.
the short answer is that it was that, how can we prevent that frictive point? But I think if you zoom out, again, around 2020, ZERP is ending.
Mhm.
There's this like giant loot of new software companies in the market. I think the market's maturing in general, but the software markets are still relatively immature. If you can compare it to something like consumer goods, where you have toothpaste companies like bidding for which shelf they want to be on Walmart,
Yeah.
like they want to be like eye height, on a week by week basis. Like if you look at how software companies were monetizing even now, but certainly 5-10 years ago, it's so far behind. And because the last 10, 15 years of software has been the product experience has been your kind of unique differentiator, right? That's why you see so much focus on MVPs and launching fast, moving very quick, A/B testing,
Right.
feature flagging. Like you want to be able to iterate very quickly on the product experience, and that is how you. And it's like that's how you get customers. And then it's like, okay, we'll charge $10 per seat per month for this. Good to go. And then as ZERP ended and like VC kind of money dried up, what ended up happening, companies started hiring slower. Your seat-based businesses, their revenue started increasing, decreasing in some cases, even with the kind of plateauing of headcounts at their customers, but their value delivered ostensibly still increased. And so there was this
Hmm.
mismatch between value delivered and what revenue made, and
Yes.
that pushes to be then closer to value aligned pricing, and it pushes you to change, and then we get back to this, you're trying to iterate and compete in the arena on your pricing and packaging, not just on your product, which then pushes to wanting to be nimble, not waiting 9 months to launch a new pricing and packaging feature, or a new kind of go to market monetization feature. And then it pushes for this need of a company to help you move quickly on your monetization, the same way that like a launch darkly or something might help you move quickly on your product launching.
Yes.
And so that is kind of the like from first principles way that Metronome came about, I think.
Yeah.
And you see it now even more so with the AI boom, because AI companies super expensive to serve. Everyone's
Yes.
renting graphics cards and eking out margin on top of them. And and the I don't think we've figured out the right pricing model for AI yet. You see, like Cursor's experimenting with this. You see, the core labs like OpenAI and Anthropic kind of trying new go-to-market motions and new even product verticals on a literally weekly or daily basis. And so that just pushed and kind of like I think accelerated the timeline for this vision probably 10, 15 years, where now it's like
Yeah, I
almost like if
agree.
you're an AI company, it's table stakes that you're able to try out new pricing tomorrow.
Right.
And so that's kind of the origin, the pressures that led to Metronome, and then kind of the accelerants or the tailwinds that have led us here.
Thank you for taking us through that. So now what's really been kind of stirring in my head is you talked about, you know, kind of all data is inherently real time, right? It's generated for a reason. However, it doesn't necessarily need to be utilized in real time. In fact, there's good reasons to do things in batch. And when I think about large enterprises, ultimately you're going to need to be masters of both, right? Especially if you've been around for a long time, because you probably have a huge batch of state. And I started thinking about what you said. Well, you could do a lot of this in batch, but I think the ultimate goal is to get as much to event driven as you can for the reason you said, fast iteration. Doesn't matter really what business you're in. The ability to experiment quickly and fail quickly or succeed quickly, I think is absolutely a game changer for having those deep immersive customer experiences, honestly, regardless of whether you sell toothpaste, build cars, or have the billing system. Then I think it's really interesting to kind of see that crux was ultimately the start of Metronome.
Yeah.
So, Confluent, in Confluent Cloud, which you guys use, we talk about data streaming a lot, obviously, but what we ultimately sell is a data streaming platform. So it's more than just data streaming. So I'm curious, at Metronome, are you using any of our connectors or integrations that we have with various cloud service providers as part of your stack?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the kind of like obvious answer is yes, because data has to get in and out of the cluster at the very least. I think probably not as much as like an ideal deployment would look like, I would say. We definitely use connectors to load data. We run a lot of workloads on AWS, or we have the OLAP clusters, and like a lot of these S3, a lot of these kind of either faucets or sinks or whatever the destinations
Yeah, sure.
are powered via Kafka connectors at the very least. We do a lot of offline data processing, and so like we've been kind of kicking the tires on like Tableflow, for example.
Oh, cool.
But I think there's a lot of more kind of platform level value that we could probably be getting. I think generally we mostly think of our Kafka deployment right now as the backbone that we have to load data in via maybe connectors and then get data out via maybe connectors, and then we want it to run flawlessly, which is the main kind of value prop that I think we perceive today.
Excellent. What about data governance? Like, how is important at Metronome to ensure that the data is of high quality as it ingresses into your data stream?
It's important, but I think probably not in the way that necessarily you mean when you talk about data governance. We focus a lot on being exactly correct. And so we focus a lot. I think we're actually the largest Confluent exactly once cluster on Confluent Cloud exactly once cluster
Oh, wow.
deployed.
Okay.
According to according to some of the folks that have been supporting us.
I believe it.
So like I think when we think about like kind of like how data quality and data correctness is a lot of making sure that like if an event happens that you're going to get billed for, of course you only want to be billed for it once, and but you also don't want to undercount it because we have people that each event is worth hundreds or more dollars, and so
Sure.
missing one or two events.
You're
It's their
stealing money.
back.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we have the opposite. We have customers where each event is worth hundreds of a cent, and they're sending us billions of them, and trade off
Important.
making sure you can support kind of both ends of that spectrum is
Yeah.
important. But I think we don't do a ton of kind of like data cataloging, data governance in the Kafka like using kind of like Confluent tooling as you might kind of be referring to.
Yeah.
We do care a lot about making sure that we know exactly what's entering and leaving the cluster, and that we are counting everything and processing everything exactly how we should be within that, because we have to uh, maintain exactly correct financial
Yeah.
records. But we do a lot of that kind of processing on the extremities, I'd say.
So for the audience, they may not be familiar exactly what semantics basically is: mechanisms and assurances to ensure that something that was produced is only consumed one time, right? As you can imagine, in the financial services world, if you're dealing with money going in and you duplicate that, you're creating money. If you don't process something, and that's an important insurance as well, you're stealing money. Money's disappearing, right? So very important to be able to support that, and importantly at scale. So one other piece to the data streaming platform, curious, is Metronome taking advantage of any stream processing?
We use Kafka streams.
Oh,
And
cool.
so
Great.
we actually are heavy users of Kafka streams. We explored Flink
Mhm.
with you guys and also independently earlier before. I think your Flink offering is relatively new, but um for all of our kind of stream processing, which is to say kind of aggregating events and producing
Mhm.
roll up, you can think most of what Metronome does is stream processing, and that you're
Makes
sending raw
sense.
events in and you're getting aggregates, like for example an invoice or a revenue trend line or something out, right? Like if you send in 100 million events, you're still only getting like roughly one invoice out. So that those roll-ups are stream processing. And we use Kafka streams for that heavily. We've done a lot of engineering to make Kafka streams work at scale. There's some talks we've given. I'm sure you can find them on YouTube, or we can put them in the show notes on kind of what it looks like to run Kafka streams at scale, because we're storing, terabytes and terabytes of state in RocksDB hosts
Mhm.
that are running, and then making sure that those hosts can be resilient to, for example, the instance dying without having to reprocess the change logs and whatnot. This is fairly like in the weeds for Kafka streams nerds out there, I guess. But it is, yeah, we are heavy Kafka streams users, and we really like for those of you who don't know, I guess, Flink or these other kind of stream processing technologies run as like a secondary cluster, and you're loading data in and then kind of like processing data in the Flink cluster.
Yeah.
Kafka streams is running as a library, basically as part of your streams app. And so you can deploy it
Mhm.
very easily in our existing kind of Kubernetes. All the monitoring and stuff that we have for it just kind of works out of the box. And it really kind of merges the data storage of the stream processor with the actual application, like stream processor itself. And so it has made it relatively easy for us to build high quality streams processing features. But we had to invest a lot of engineering in, we are running Kafka streams at extreme scale. And
Right.
again, with all the overhead of exactly once and stuff that we've kind of talked about already. So it's not something that we like, it's something that we invest heavily in.
That's great. So it's a really advanced deployment of Kafka streams. Well, that's music to my ears. I just want to summarize for everyone, to address this real-time billing and to address the core challenge that Metronome was going after. Data streaming was obviously a requirement because you were looking to take all of those data points, and considering the customers you were targeting, whether it's a hyperscaler, an ISV, an AI company, they're all doing these little tiny billing increments, whether it's hourly based, minutes based, seconds based, things like, technologies like Lambda that have like invocations. And all of that was necessary, and a data streaming platform was necessary ultimately to facilitate a system that scales now to billions of events a day. Is that fair?
Yep.
Excellent. So next, we're going to dive into how your partnership with Confluent solve your data challenges. But first, a quick word from our sponsor.
Your data shouldn't be a problem to manage. It should be your superpower. The Confluent data streaming platform transforms organizations with trustworthy, real-time data that seamlessly spans your entire environment and powers innovation across every use case. Create smarter, deploy faster, and maximize efficiency with a true data streaming platform from the pioneers in data streaming.
Now we'll go beyond the stream on why Confluent was the right fit for Metronome. So obviously we landed on data streaming, like that was absolutely necessary. And I just kind of want to dive in a bit more about why Confluent, right? Because we're not the only managed data streaming provider out there. So, I know that you initially realized that you didn't want to build your own data streaming platform. What led to initially starting your partnership with Confluent?
It's a good question. I think that at the time, at the very least, I think probably still now, but at the time, it, you were definitely kind of the face of Kafka. Like there's other you can I guess I won't name them, but like there are other
There are
places
other
you can go
people.
to the market and buy manage Kafka, but Confluent is, you have a lot of the original committers and really kind of are the face of Kafka. That's a big part of it. I think it's very easy to get off and running was a big thing for us. Again, rewind 5 years, we don't have a team of engineers, we don't have, whatever a company bank account yet. Much, like it's like I don't want to talk to like a bunch of salespeople.
Right.
Being able to kind of just go and sign up on the web page and get a URL that we can start pointing our streams apps to was helpful. And I think the other kind of the abstraction layer of, 'cause I think different players of managed services kind of abstract differently and
Sure.
do this. You can run, you can spin up, for example, broker fleets on AWS or something, but I think we wanted to hands off a lot of that, especially early on. We just wanted, again, we wanted a connection string that we could point our streams apps to and kind of like start producing data in and get it
Yeah.
out. And that abstraction layer felt pretty natural with Confluent. And so,
Yeah.
being able to just, again, like go type in or on the web page, type in our email, get a connection string, start playing around, and then scale. Like we scaled my cluster to way too long. We were on like the shared, the shared PLG cluster for a long time, and that kind of uh, ease of getting set up with something that was like the right abstraction for us made it a pretty easy choice.
Yeah. See, I mean, I'm inherently biased. I'm not going to lie. I ran open source Kafka at a startup that, doesn't remain today. And I absolutely would have been a Confluent Cloud customer if it existed at the time. And there, like you said, there's other managed Kafka services, but what they extract away is, usually limited. And you will find that in most cases, there's still some manual work to do, whether it's rebalancing topics, we're dealing with hot partitions, scaling up and scaling down, always kind of a pain. I don't think anyone's quite got all of it fully abstracted, except for us. And if someone wants to argue that with me, I'm happy. I'm open for debate. But what we've always kind of strived here is to build what you kind of alluded to was kind of like the S3 for data streaming. Like no one ever thinks of, hey, did I scale up S3 well enough? Did I, you just have a bucket, an endpoint, and you send data to it and you pull data from it, and you don't ever think about anything else. And honestly, that's the experience I hope everyone has with Confluent Cloud, except not with object stores, with events.
Yeah.
So I think, I always ask this question, and I don't know if it really applies. Actually, let me take a step back. Imagine where you guys are now. If you had to run data streaming yourself, how do you think that would affect your engineering and operation resources?
It would slow us down. I mean, honestly, it's even, anywhere that we are running, like our core infrastructure is such a accelerant or a limiter, right? It's like we have a very lean team running Kafka, and I wish that they could move 10x faster.
Right.
I have we have a fatter team running like our internal services. I wish they could run faster, right? Like, and there's always this demand to run faster. I think if we had to, you know, the team focus on running Kafka, so they couldn't even start to build those internal services that we need, then we would be significantly slower. It's hard to imagine. It's like not hard to imagine hypothetical in some cases.
Sure.
But at this is Metronome is a big user of, especially early on, was a big user of managed services across the board because we are building novel infrastructure. We don't want to be building unnovel infrastructure, right? Like I don't want to be like spending my time working on the stuff that there's a whole company out there solving for us. So it's hard to imagine where we'd be without, and all of the kind of like time that we saved from Confluent or all the other managed services that we used, so we could dedicate our engineers building the kind of like novel experiences on top of that infrastructure, which I really think is where the market, that's where we're able to provide the most value to the market.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's a really exciting time for any technologist to be able to take these like best in breed building blocks and kind of plug them in. And then you just have to figure out the code, the part that is your business value that can utilize all of them and not really worry about anything breaking. So I'm an operations guy, right? Yeah. PagerDuty, I still hear it. I haven't had PagerDuty on my phone in 5 years, but I can still hear it go off sometimes. So the idea of just having something that just works is kind of a beautiful thing.
And the same on your monetization as well, right? Like you don't want to be spending your time figuring out how to invoice your
Metronome is one of those Lego pieces that you need.
Yep.
As far as I'm concerned, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to build
your team, your Confluent doesn't want to be spending time figuring out how to launch new pricing models. They want to be building the features to enable those new pricing models, and then just like they want to be building the features, and then not the pricing models just work out of the box.
The beautiful Ouroboros of technology. So again, back to this question that I ask everyone, but I think I don't know if it applies to you guys. A lot of times when Confluent is introduced, there's usually some type of sticky point of like getting the business on board outside of the engineering. It sounds like the team was very small when you decided that you were going to land on data stream. Was there any type of pressure that said, don't use this service or we should build it ourselves?
No,
you guys knew, you knew what you wanted.
We're a technology-driven company, so we are selling the infrastructure. That is the product. And so whatever the technologies we need to build that infrastructure, as long as they are the right technologies, the business sort of like definitionally supportive of. And so no real sticking points. I think Good. I'm trying to think like what the closest thing to a sticking point would be, but I think it's, the real thing is just like anytime we're bringing in a new technology, whether it's a managed one or one that we were going to run ourselves, the question is basically, is this going to help us deliver the value to our customers faster? And for something as core as data streaming, it's a story that it's pretty easy to tell.
That's a wonderful thing to hear, that our services help you deliver that value. So I have a note here about the final impact. So I'm gonna read through this a little bit. I just want to make sure that you can verify, and if there's anything you have to add, please do. 90% of Metronome's engineering resources are spent building features, not operations. That's an amazing number if that's right. Highly available at scale, 10,000 invoices per second, billions of events per day with no data loss and extremely low end latency. Is that a good description of where you guys are at? Thanks to data stream.
Yes. I think, you just to put a little bit of a fine tooth on it, you've mentioned no data loss, extremely low end-to-end latency. We are processing events on a second level latency end to end. So if an event occurs in your business, it'll show up on your end customer's invoice in seconds, on a second order latency, and that'll be you're cutting users off for fraud, and that's all done exactly once. There's no kind of like error bars on that, and at the scale numbers that you mentioned.
Yeah, honestly, be able to turn down like a trial within a second. It's just, how much better can you do that? You almost have to go into the future, and if you figure that out, Cosmo,
we're working on it. So if you're interested.
Okay, well, my next question is going to get there. So I'm really curious, like, what's your vision for the future of data streaming at Metronome? What AI initiatives you have? Just kind of like, let's just go off of what the future looks like the next couple of years at Metronome.
The biggest thing is kind of like it's a wordy answer, I would say, but we think of the kind of core data infrastructure at Metronome as having two axes. Is a time to revenue, which is basically that second level. I didn't say how long does it take us to actually apply a price to event, and then basically the cardinality of data that we can support. Okay. So in some ways you can think of us as basically as an observability platform of revenue data. And if you've worked in the observability space, you know that metric cardinality and the cardinality of the underlying data is top of mind,
absolutely,
you could say, because it ends up just ballooning out into hundreds of millions or billions of data points. You can think of, for example, a very popular pricing model that's happening now, which is the per seat based credits. And so if you have a cursor subscription, you get access to X number of pro agent requests a day or something.
Yes.
So that's per seat per day. And then you may want to break down that usage by hour or minute. And suddenly you get this cardinality explosion. Think of a cursor selling into an or, even if Confluent size.
Yeah.
And then breaking that down per day or per hour. And then, meanwhile, still needing to provide that the low time to revenue data is that's the core challenge for Metronome, and it has been from day zero, and now 5 years, 6 years later, it still is, and I would guess it will be in 6 years from now as well. And so that's not as much as, it's not like a fun answer, like we want to bring in, this like sweet new
No, but it's a
technology
real
or whatever.
challenge. Yeah.
But that is just the name of the game, day in, day out, to build. I think we are truly operating at the forefront of data streaming in a lot of ways. And it's always just pushing that horizon up on that chart. Can be lower time to revenue and higher cardinality of that revenue data.
And I know you kind of said, you hinted when I said, the only thing you do better is the future. So clearly you have some Gen AI, some AI initiatives. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that?
The big thing for there's kind of two things. One is, at the end of the day, Metronome just takes in contracts and outputs, they're like a programmatic representation of that contract, right? And so that's something that you can think about, like Gen AI being helpful with. I think figuring out also things like helping you optimize your pricing is exciting, obviously. Saying like, if you have the kind of underlying data, we are that observability platform. Can we help suggest pricing models that will make you more money based on that data? That's very exciting. I think broadly, even just doing kind of forecasting on top of that, if you have individual kind of inputs to your revenue, a lot of times revenue forecasting really just is looking at like trend lines and forecasting on, and like, there's a lot of whatever, like space to run with even something as simple as that.
Sure.
But like, if you have access to that raw data, then being able to help companies forecast and more accurately predict, especially in a usage base where, revenue can spike up or drop, worse in very unpredictable ways, being able to help bring some clarity to that to our customers is super exciting, I think.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, when I think about just, it's all really hyper personalization, right? Even in like a full billing infrastructure platform like you guys are offering, whether you said it's prediction or recommendations. Hey, we think we have this optimized billing platform or billing structure that we think will, be fire for you. And because of your infrastructure, you can implement it immediately, experiment, and then confirm or deny whether that's going to work and then iterate. And I imagine there's probably a world where the agents are doing that for us, the AI agents.
That would be the dream.
It's getting a little scary, but I'm sure the AI will figure out a way that we can all save money.
Or make more, depending
on
what
your perspective. Hey, those are both very lofty goals. So, Cosmo, before we let you go, we're going to do a lightning round. Bite-sized questions, bite-sized answers. That is BYTE. Like hot takes, but schema back and serialized. Are you ready?
Sure.
What is something you hate about IT?
Do you mean about like technology in general? Or
yeah,
I hate it when I have to log in SSO multiple times, but
who doesn't?
I want more of the kind of Confluent style managed services where it's like you just get a URL and you run the service and you don't have to think about it. I want Confluent to be leading to that more. I don't want to think about the infrastructure as much as possible, especially now in the agentic world. It's like, I think databases and underlying, like, as much as those can be abstracted away and just let, small startups build and then scale. I think that is maybe that's a cold take, but that is.
No, I like it. You want the services, you don't care about the stuff underneath.
Yeah,
I get it. I think that's what we all want, really, in many aspects of our lives. So what is your hot take on the future of AI?
This is maybe a Metronome specific one. I don't think we figured out what the end state for AI monetization is. I think you talk about pricing. You talk about outcome-based pricing, and we talk about like the per seat-based credits and stuff. But I think we are still significantly far away from, we kind of have figured out seats and we figured out usage-based pricing at this point. But I think AI pricing, especially in the agentic world, is going to look fairly foreign to even what it looks like today.
I think that's a very good take. I mean, you look at the way CSPs build now versus when they first started, very different. So I think that is inevitability. What's a non-tech activity or hobby that's impacted the way you think about data?
it'd be fun to say like canoeing or something and make a streams joke here, but I don't know.
I'm for it.
That's a good question. I feel like I don't know if I have a super hot take or answer here. I ski a lot in the winter. I'm excited for the ski season coming up, but
Okay.
I don't think I can map back, the moguls to rebalances or something like that, unfortunately.
Well, skiing is pretty real time. I
It
mean,
is real
if
time.
you don't
It is real
turn,
time.
you don't really know.
Sometimes if you scale up, it's bumpy. So it's like,
No, but that's good. Listen, just get out there, enjoy the cold weather, just get
Yeah.
the blood pumping. Where are you getting outside inspiration? Is there a particular book or thought leader that's kind of inspired or guided some of the decisions you've made in your role?
I think that the kind of modern data stack, all this kind of Rust and new kind of new age data stores, like SlateDB and whatnot.
Mhm.
There's a lot of movement here. I don't think I have a specific. There's not like a specific like blog or podcast or something that I would refer to, but I think just following, I think Data Fusion, I think SlateDB, I think InfluxDB is doing a lot of cool stuff on
Yeah.
top of these technologies. I think following kind of some of the people working on this modern data stack and seeing kind of what they are posting on Twitter or X, or seeing what kind of newsletters they're reading, I think has been really useful for us at Metronome and for me personally.
I like it. So your inspiration's coming from the innovations in other tech, and I agree, because you think of there's some really deep engineering blogs out there where you can really get into the weeds. So just depending on what your interests are, I could see that being a very strong source of inspiration. Cosmo, any final thoughts or anything to plug?
I mean, obviously, I'm here from Metronome. You should not be building monetization
Use Metronome.
yourself. Use Metronome. We have startup packages for small. You can get off and running without any hassle, kind of like with Confluent. And then we also support the largest inference companies like Confluent, the largest AI companies like OpenAI and Anthropic. So like obviously, we'll plug Metronome. I think I'll say about that, honestly.
All right, hey, that's fantastic. Cosmo, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I can't wait for everyone to see to learn from you today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been great chatting.
And for the audience, stick around, because I'm giving you my top 3 takeaways in 2 minutes. So my first takeaway is this idea that even things that are inherently batch oriented, like billing, still need to be fueled by event-driven architecture, right? So you run a billing run at the end of the month and you get that bill, that's great. But how do you correlate that data? How do you, considering Metronome's customers, detect that a trial is about to end, or that, this instance fired up for just 3 seconds and you need to bill them for it? The only way to do that is with event-driven data. And of course, having that real-time layer allows you to experiment fast, which means you can succeed fast or fail fast. And that's my second takeaway. This idea that event-driven data is a game changer for experimentation and figuring out, is this the right way to bill our customers? Running those experiments and failing fast and figuring out allows you to optimize. So if you're even in a legacy company, an enterprise that's been around a long time, and you're able to get away with batch today, think about what that real-time power could do for you in terms of experimenting and trying to do new things with your customers. And my last takeaway is those 10,000 invoices per second, billions of invoices a month, doing that with just 10%. That's right, 10% of their engineering team dedicated to operations. Absolutely unheard of in organizations of the past. So it's absolutely critical to find a trusted partner to take care of the managed system that you need to pass over and give all of those undifferentiated or those differentiated outcomes for your customers. Why run something when someone else will run it for you? Be like Metronome. Scale to infinity with a very small engineering team. That's it for this episode of Life is But a Stream. Thanks to Cosmo for joining us, and thanks to you for tuning in. As always, we're brought to you by Confluent. The Confluent data streaming platform is the data advantage every organization needs to innovate today and win tomorrow. Your unified platform to stream, process, govern, and connect your data starts at confluent.io. If you want to connect, find me on LinkedIn. Don't forget to leave a like or comment if you're watching us on YouTube. Tell a coworker or friend about us and subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. We'll see you next time.